The 9th century presented a terrifying reality for Europe. The Vikings from Scandinavia dominated warfare through a devastating combination of brute force and terrifying speed. Instead of deploying for symmetrical set-piece battles, where armies line up on an open field with predictable formations, they launched sudden strikes against coastal targets. They relied on shallow draft vessels to infiltrate deep into narrow river systems, loot whatever they could, and escape before a proper defense could even mobilize. By the late 800s, this relentless pressure evolved. A massive coalition known as the Great Heathen Army stopped simply raiding and began conquering the land. This map illustrates the resulting geopolitical collapse, showing a unified, expanding Viking territory absorbing nearly every established Saxon border across England. Only one kingdom remained, Wessex. European kings were paralyzed. Their entire military framework was built around formalized, predictable engagements. When faced with an enemy that bypassed those rules entirely, their defensive structures instantly collapsed. King Alfred of Wessex stood as the final obstacle to total Viking control. But during the dead of winter, the Viking forces launched a massive, unexpected attack directly against his stronghold. The assault completely shattered his standing army. Alfred's royal guard, the elite, highly trained core of his military strength, was decimated, leaving the command structure of Wessex in ruins. Stripped of his power and men, the king was forced into exile within his own country. He retreated into the freezing, treacherous Somerset marshes, hiding with a handful of starving survivors in an unforgiving, muddy wasteland. He had no standing army, no centralized wealth, and an active enemy hunting him. To reclaim his nation, Alfred had to figure out how to defeat the most lethal warriors on Earth from the bottom of a frozen swamp. With conventional force off the table, Alfred turned to asymmetric warfare, a strategy where a weaker force uses unconventional tactics to exploit the vulnerabilities of a stronger, larger enemy. He weaponized the flooded, complex terrain of the marshes. Operating like a ghost, Alfred led his small band of men on highly coordinated hit-and-run strikes against isolated Viking camps. The goal of these raids was never to destroy the Viking army outright. Instead, these constant, localized attacks forced a slow, agonizing drain on Viking supplies and psychological morale. But a guerrilla campaign is ultimately a stalling tactic. It bought Alfred the crucial months he needed to secretly send messengers across the countryside, slowly rallying the surviving men of Wessex to prepare for a definitive spring offensive against the Viking warlord Guthrum. Surviving the brutal winter mud was necessary, but it only earned them the right to face an entirely rested Viking army in open combat. As Alfred marched his newly reformed force to Edington, he faced a glaring tactical deficit. The Vikings were larger, stronger, and fought with a ferocious, highly individualistic style. Fighting them one-on-one meant certain death. He needed a system that removed individual combat from the equation entirely. His solution relied on a strict defensive formation that perfectly mirrored the mechanical logic of the ancient Spartan phalanx. This schematic demonstrates the formation. Soldiers stood tightly shoulder to shoulder, layering shields into an interlocking wall. One shield covers a warrior's left side, projecting an overlap over the man beside him. If a single soldier breaks formation, the overlap disappears, creating a fatal gap. By mathematically locking his men together, Alfred negated the Vikings' greatest asset. He replaced the chaos of individual ferocity with the unbreakable strength of shared discipline. At the Battle of Edington, the Viking army charged forward with their usual terrifying momentum. But instead of scattering terrified individuals, the Vikings crashed directly into a solid wall of oak and iron. The Vikings hacked and slashed at the line, trying to force a breach. The Saxons held firm, trusting the geometry of the wall and the men beside them. Stripping away the Vikings' ability to maneuver quickly meant their assault eventually exhausted its own energy against the static defense. Once the enemy's momentum broke, Alfred ordered his disciplined ranks to systematically push forward. This steady, crushing advance completely shattered the remaining Viking forces, driving them from the field in a total retreat. The Saxons did not possess superior weaponry or rely on lone heroes. They won because they operated within a psychological framework that absorbed terror without breaking. The fallout from Edington was immediate. Alfred pursued Guthrum, forcing the warlord to sign a binding peace treaty and convert to Christianity, neutralizing him as an immediate ideological threat. This treaty partitions the territory of England, establishing clear borders that stopped the Viking expansion and ensured the survival of Saxon culture, language, and law. Facing complete annihilation, Wessex was saved by the hardest military tactic to master: absolute discipline and trusting the person standing right next to you.